We are in week 2 of a message series called What Would Jesus Undo? What would Jesus undo? I don't know if you remember a few years back, people were wearing the WWJD bracelets as a reminder to ask themselves what Jesus would do in any given situation throughout their day. But in this series, we're asking the flip side of that question. What are the things Jesus would want to undo? What are the things that can break his heart? What are the things that he sees in us that would make him say, you know, I've got something so much better for your life, but to get there, we need to undo this a little bit and create space to build a new thing in its place. Have you ever had God build a new thing in your life? I mean, that was great. I love when God builds new stuff. Sometimes God needs us to kind of disentangle some things, right, to create space for him to build. Last week we talked about hypocrisy and how Jesus would undo the show. We looked at undoing the disconnect between, who we are on the inside and what we're showing to people on the outside. And this week, we're going to look a little bit at how we present ourselves to God. I'm going to give that a moment to settle. Have you ever had an awkward gift-giving mishap? Like Christmas, birthday, just kind of one of those awkward moments. You gave them this gift that you thought would be really cool, and they opened it, they got that look like, but what is it? Has that ever happened to you? Yeah, I've seen a few of those. I was on the other end kind of something like that this last Christmas. There's a video game coming out at the end of January that I was really looking forward to because I've never grown up, but that's okay. And Barbie got creative. So she pre-ordered the game for me, and then I think she got Greg or somebody to help her. And she went and she found what the cover art for the game was going to be, resized the picture, they printed it out. She went and grabbed one of my old video game cases for that platform. Okay, she's with it. Slides it inside that, wraps that up, gives that to me on Christmas. So Christmas morning, I sit there, I open this, I'm like, it looked really good. So I'm thinking, did you get this? How'd you get this a month early? Like, they don't just give these out a month early. When they say January 29th, they mean, how'd you do this? So then I open the thing up, and it's empty. And it's still really cool, but there's that second where you're processing, I have this very real-looking thing in my hands, but it's an empty box, And I got to thinking, what if? What if the songs we sing, what if sermons that we preach sometimes, maybe even the acts of service we do for other people, what if they can be empty gifts to God? Can it ever get that way? Can it ever look like that? What if our lives are wrapped up with this spiritual image and we're doing all of the right things, but on the inside our hearts are actually far from God? Maybe even because we've been putting out so much energy trying to do all the right things, because they're the right things to do. I don't know. But what if he sometimes feels like he opens an empty box of worship? Just what if? What would Jesus undo? Jesus would undo what we'll call hollow worship today, empty worship. Jesus called it worship in vain, worship that doesn't accomplish anything. It's useless, expensive energy. Let's look at Matthew 15. Verse 1 starts with an interesting conversation between Jesus and the Pharisees. Matthew 15:1. Then some Pharisees and teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem, and they asked, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat." Now, this may sound way trivial, but to get this, we need to understand the Pharisees were obsessed with something called ceremonial cleanliness. Ceremonial cleanliness. And it's not the same thing as personal hygiene, okay? It isn't just physically cleanliness that a lot of us can get obsessed about. I like to be clean. I do. I like things clean. I have a close friend who expends probably 3 times the energy that I do, keeping himself and his house clean. I kid you not, he's got kids. I'd probably still feel comfortable eating off his floor more days than not. And we like to kid him about it occasionally, but I get it. I do. I get it. I understand it. I understand the motivation. I can see that perspective that's going to put that time into that. And that's cool. I like that. The Pharisees were obsessed in a different way. Okay, with them it was a ceremony thing. It was a tradition thing. It was a spiritual thing for them. Because a devout Jew saw the whole world divided into 2 categories. Everything is either clean or it's unclean. There are clean animals and there are unclean animals. And there were guidelines from God to tell the difference. It counted for people too. If you have any type of bodily discharge, you're unclean. If you have a skin problem, You're unclean. If you touch a pig, you're unclean. If you touch a dead body, you're unclean. And the problem was that uncleanness was contagious. It was transferable. It was cooties. In 5th grade, if you got cooties, then you gave cooties, right? So don't get close to the kids that have cooties, because then you'll get them, and it's bad. So if an unclean mouse touched a cup, the cup was unclean. If you touched that cup, then you are unclean. If your spouse touched you, your spouse was unclean, and neither of you were fit for worship at the temple. When you were unclean, you then had to go through an elaborate ceremony to cleanse yourself physically and spiritually so that you were eligible to offer worship to God. So this was a big deal for them. And depending on how unclean you were, the ceremony would be more or less intense. Generally, in basic situations, what you had to do is take a certain amount of water, known as a quarter of a log. Okay? True story. Quarter of a log. How much is that? A quarter of a log is enough water to fit in an eggshell and a half. Okay? So it didn't take much. Eggshell and a half. I don't know where they came up with this. That one eggshell isn't quite enough. Let me do another. I don't know. But that's what it was. That's how much it was. And then you'd have to take your hands kind of like this, and someone would pour the clean water over your unclean hands. But when the clean water touched your unclean hands, the water would become unclean because it's transferable, right? So the water had the cooties, and then you'd have to do your hands like this, so your water would drip off the hands and not get you unclean on the way down, and you do both sides so that you're good, and then you would rub your hands together, and you would be ceremonially clean. And a devout Jew would not only do this before meals, but they would even do this ritual between courses. So today, you would cleanse yourself before your hamburger, and then before your tater tots, and then again before your chocolate malt, just to make sure, right? So the Pharisees were asking Jesus, they're scratching their heads, why don't your guys do this? Don't they care about being clean and being fit for worship? But this was kind of a trigger issue with Jesus, so he just lets them have it. He says, you're not even treating people with respect. You're not even showing love to other people. Your hearts aren't even connected with God. But here you are obsessing about all these external forms of worship when there's no real worship in your heart. In verse 7, Jesus, in both barrels, he's like, you hypocrites. Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They give me lip service, but their hearts aren't right. And Jesus says, how do they worship? They worship me in vain. Their worship isn't pleasing to me. It's hollow. It's empty. On the outside, it looks like worship, but because the inside isn't right, it's just an empty gift. It's worship that doesn't touch my heart. And I think this is one of the greatest areas of potential spiritual growth that all of us have. You, me, all of us together. So I want to take a few moments. I want to talk about worship this morning. I want to talk about what it is. I want to talk about how you do it. What does it look like? And when we talk about worship, most people immediately think about music. It's partly our fault because that's what we call the music part of our service is worship. But the default, is to start thinking about styles of music then. I like this style of worship. I don't like that style of worship. I mean, Tasha Cobb is phenomenal. Hillsong, I don't know if I really... Planet Shakers is way too rowdy for me. I like this worship. I don't like... Or maybe some people think about environment. In other words, they say worship should be done in a very reverent and holy environment with altars and stained glass and I'm only here at second service to try to condition myself for the fact we probably won't have the stained glass in the next building. And I'm not sure what to think about that because it needs to be this environment. But then you got people on the other end that are saying, no. Worship needs to be rowdy and exuberant. It needs to be fun because we serve a joyful God and we should express our love to Him with His great passion. So which one's right? Yeah. When you think about it, with all the different people all over the world, the different races, the different life situations, the different cultural styles of music, the creative ways to express worship to the goodness of our God are almost limitless. Almost limitless. I've been in churches with choirs and robes. I've been in churches with pews and stained glass and the very liturgical services that tend to go with that. I've been in Pentecostal churches with the fast camp meeting, type music and excitable expressions of praise. I've been in churches all along the in-between, and there are things I like and don't like about all of them. I've sung songs out of hymn books. I've sung songs off screens. I've sung songs printed in programs. Sometimes you stand and sit and kneel and sit and kneel and stand, and sometimes you move a little less. Sometimes you want to get up and you jump up and down for a couple of minutes because you're so excited. I've been in churches where people raise their hands in worship. I've been in other churches where you better have a question ready if your hand goes up because you're getting called on. Some wave ribbons and flags and might play tambourines. Other places they don't. Here you might see some people waving some flags around there in the back. It's just they're wanting to make their worship as big to God as they can. Just, God, I love you, and I want to wave a bunch of bright colors around because that's the worship coming out of my heart today. Fair warning, I have trained our sound techs to use tranquilizer darts on any unauthorized tambourine playing. So that hasn't been a thing for a while, just to let you know. But which way is best? Which way is best? Very traditional or very charismatic? And the answer is both, or neither. Any expression of worship honors God when our heart is connected to who He is and we're celebrating Him. But no form of worship is right when the heart isn't right. They honor me with their lips, Jesus said, but their heart is far from me. It doesn't mean you always have to feel it. Okay? Sometimes you offer a sacrifice of praise where you express worship to Him because you know you need to, because you know He's just worthy all the time. And there's a time to worship God when you with your will, when you're having trouble bringing your heart along, and that's fine. When there's this honesty inside where you say, God, I feel like junk this morning, and be honest, I'm having trust issues right now because I'm not seeing this happen, but I'm going to choose to worship you even in my dark time because I know that's where I need to be, and I know you're still that great. When what we can't do is just fall into routine of coming in here, every Sunday or maybe a small group, and you go through the motions while we aren't doing anything to bring our lives into obedience to His voice day to day. Do we sing simply because it's the thing Christians are supposed to do? Do we help people with acts of service simply because it's the expected thing for Christians to do? Sometimes we do. I know I have days where I do the pastor thing because that's what a pastor is supposed to do, and honestly, my heart may not be there. But then I have to stop and take a moment and say, okay, God, I see what I'm doing here, and that's not where I want to be. Can we take a minute and get my heart right, and so I can do this for worship and not out of obligation? It's true worship that touches the heart of God is not about the style of music. It's a reflection of a heart submitting to God. And that may or may not be comfortable at times. You think about it, if you have kids, okay? If you have kids, raise your hand. I don't, okay? So in my case, maybe I'll think about my group of friends, whatever, but if your kids, you're a good dad or you're a good mom, and your kids, they want to come up to you in this little group and they say, we really think you're great and we just love you so much, Dad. So to tell you how we feel, we put together this song to express our appreciation. Man, that's awesome. But then they stand there and they sing it a cappella. No music. They did the best they could in the moment, but what kind of dad, friend, mom, whatever, what kind of dad would I be if I stood there and I was like, no, guys, you don't understand. That's not the style I prefer. When you tell me how great I am and how much you love me, I prefer praise band, and little fog and some colored lights would be good. You could put on some tighter jeans. You could your floppy hair on top, comb that back and cut the sides a little shorter, And I need to tell which one to use the worship leader because if I can't pick out the worship leader, it's not quite right, You'd never do that to your kids, right? Because your heart has melted before they even started singing. Or they could put together the stomp routine, with some pots and pans. Hey, Dad, you're the greatest, and oh, no, stop. Your father prefers the more austere, serene environment where you read some liturgy first. Because liturgy is what turns my heart towards my people. It unifies you all around a particular theological theme. Express it in such a way that brings me real honor and majesty the way I prefer. No. Is he going to get that from a 5-year-old? Probably not, right? But yet Jesus says, let the little children come to me. I want the praise that a kid can bring me. And the praise that a kid can bring me is honest, and it doesn't have to get filtered through a form. If we want to get worship right, I think we have to understand this right here. Christianity is not a hobby for us. It's not a hobby. Not for me. It's not one of several interests in a list. It's not just a label. We're all in on this, right? Because if Christ is not raised from the dead, we're still dead in our sin. So if we're not all in on something that's worth being all in on, then we might as well walk away now. And that's pretty blunt, and it's upfront and honest. And if you're a guest and you're just checking out the Jesus thing, I'm letting you know right now, that's where Jesus is going to bring this. It's all or nothing for Jesus. But there's a lot of good that comes with that. Don't get too scared there. But if we're a follower of Jesus, Christ is our life. It's our life. Therefore, worship isn't just songs we sing, it's the life we live. So if we need to fix our worship today, let's reach into the past couple weeks and grab hold of that Easter mindset we had 2 weeks ago, right? And we're going to take a moment here in a little bit. I'm going to cut this a little bit short because I just want to give us some time to just kind of let it rip, just let it out. Just let our heart I love you, God. Okay, so to get there, maybe we need to take some time, like this morning or Wednesday afternoon if you need to. Let's grab that Easter mindset. Let's reach back, grab that, visualize what God did for us. What God did for us through His Son, the sinless, perfect Son of God, who was obedient even to death on the cross, that really to a real person, that really happened, that He did that for us, who suffered, bled, and died so that our sin could be forgiven. The stuff that we are already ashamed of and the stuff that we haven't even done yet to know to be ashamed of it, He saw all that, and it's covered under His blood that He shed for us. This Jesus who defeated death itself, hell, and the grave, because 3 days later, He rose again from the dead, opening this way for us to be renewed and to have a life in Him. And then He ascended up to the right hand of God the Father's throne and making intercession for you. Jesus is praying for you right now. Jesus is sitting at God the Father's right hand talking about you, making sure your needs are heard, making sure your hurts and your challenges are recognized. Wow! He didn't leave you alone. You'll never be alone. He said, I'll never leave you or forsake you. He sent the very same Spirit that raised Jesus Christ's body up from the dead to dwell within those of you and me who are followers of Christ today. The Holy Spirit of God is here with us and in us. And in view of who God is and what He's done, when your heart is right and you're honest before Him, sometimes you just have to get creative in expressing your worship, your love, your praise for God. You give Him honor because He's the only one who is worthy. So how should we worship? What should that look like? Does it even matter that we sing at all or do anything else if it's all just in the heart? Well, yeah, it does. Because if it's real on the inside, God's going to want to see it come out on the outside. You still want to hear it from your 5-year-old every day. You may know it, but you love it. When my niece gives me a kiss on the cheek every night before she goes to bed that we're over hanging out with Barbie's brother and his wife, I mean, I love it. That's a special moment, and I don't care if there's a song with it or whatever, it's just, and I don't know what I'd do if I didn't. She's just in a habit sometimes, but man, I love that. I love that. If we're too embarrassed to make our love for God public in church, how deep does it really go on the inside of us? And I'm not saying that to beat you down. It's sometimes we got to think about this stuff. We see in the Bible how real worship in the heart works itself out in different ways. When our heart's right before Him, sometimes we bow in reverence. Sometimes we bow in reverence. We're just aware of how great and awesome and powerful and holy He is, and how privileged we are to be able to live out our lives in His amazing presence. And we bow before Him. The psalmist said in Psalms 95, "Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker, for He is our God. We are the people of His pasture, the sheep under His care. Our life is in His hands." Sometimes you just got to bow and acknowledge it and do something to show it. Every now and then you just get overwhelmed with who he is and what he's done. You fall to your knees because it gets so real for you. You can't even stand in his presence, like Peter, who fell before Jesus in repentance, like the wise men who knelt bringing gifts to the newborn Son of God. You just fall down and you worship in this act, this expression of submission and worship because of who God is. Paul told the Philippian church that one day every knee will bow before Jesus. We might as well get a head start. I mean, if that's going to be the universal posture, let's get comfortable, right? Sometimes we lift our hands in adoration to our God. It isn't just some weird thing. It isn't just some charismatic church thing. This is a Bible thing. The Apostle Paul said, lift up holy hands to God. David said in the wilderness, I will praise you as long as I live. In your name, I will lift up my hands. And sometimes you're overwhelmed and you're going under, and you identify with David being in a wilderness, lost somewhere out alone in a desolate place. And you just have to start praising God anyways because that's all you have left. So your hands go up. In our culture, lifted hands can usually mean two things. Sometimes it's surrender when you're in a challenging spot, right? Show of deference and submission, surrender. I give up. I'm not gonna make a move against you. You can have your way. Sometimes we lift our hands and surrender to God when we know we need to say, I'm wanting this, but not my will, God. I'm not going to challenge you. Your will be done. I'm going to go with you. I submit. But we also tend to lift hands in moments of victory, right? When your team wins, and you're not even thinking about it, just You pulled off the challenging project at work. It's in your chest, bumping your buddies at work. Fall Fest came off without a hitch. We celebrate those wins, and the hands just pop up. And when we come before God, we kind of get both at the same time, right? Because that moment when we offer ourselves in surrender to God is the moment when victory begins in our lives. And there's this celebration and worship. So in that moment, whether you've seen the victory yet or you haven't, the hands just go up and we express our excitement in who God is and the fact that we get to live our lives with him. Sometimes we kneel down before him. Sometimes the hands go up. Sometimes you just got to dance in celebration. I'd give you an example, but you don't want that. When you really experience the life of God working in you in a personal way, there are times you just can't keep still. It's okay to move in church. It's okay to move when you're not in church. Psalm 149 says, let them praise his name with dancing. Let it get down deep inside of you till you're moving. There's not a particular way that has to look. I know every one of you has given out with some kind of dance at some point in your life. I'm not even asking for a show of hands because I might make some of you lie. I know you've done it. Now, again, if it looks like me, it was probably awful, but you've tried. You did something. At one point, you got that excited. Maybe it was when he popped the question out in the park. Or when you got the new phone, if you're an easily excitable person, or graduation, or the promotion that you've been waiting for. If you're a senior citizen with us today, you might remember when the Bengals won a playoff game, and you had that moment to want to dance for some, But when God's goodness becomes real to you, dancing just becomes part of your worship. And David said, God turned my weeping into dancing. He turned my mourning into a moment of celebration. And some of you need to let God's power and grace and mercy become real in the deepest part of you. Own it. Let it be real to you. This actually happened. There is a God that loves you that much. Just go ahead and accept it and let it in. You've been afraid maybe to let it get too deep in your heart because things probably need to stay a little dignified. I got a rep that I got to protect. There's an image thing, and yeah, I've seen that guy, and I don't want to be that guy. But no, you need to understand where that guy's been and where he is now and why he praises that way, and you might join him. Celebrate the fact that God has made you a new person. Celebrate the fact that your past doesn't have to be your future anymore, because he gave his life and then rose again for you to bring you life. And man, that's good stuff. And like I mentioned earlier, sometimes we got to be willing to offer the sacrifice of praise. The writer of Hebrews said, through Jesus, therefore, let us continually, all the time, everywhere, in all circumstances, continually offer to our God a sacrifice of praise. In other words, we worship him when we feel it, and we worship him when we don't. Not just going through the motions and going through routine, but the choice, I'm going to worship you anyways, God. We worship him when we feel and we see the blessings all around, and we worship him when we're still hurting. We choose to worship him because our worship is not based on our circumstances. Our worship is based on his character. And that's what some of the people sitting around you have been doing today, and they're going to keep doing it as long as they have to. In the middle of your pain, in the middle of your heartache, you choose to worship him with a sacrifice of praise. Because at its heart, worship is more than any of these expressions. It's more than any of these moments. When our worship is focused on his character, it's more than just something that we do. It's who we are. A worshiper is who we are because of who God is. The way that we choose to live every day becomes the ultimate act of worship. And all of the other expressions and moments, they're just extensions of that walk of worship day to day to day. Paul put it this way in Romans 12. He said, therefore I urge you, this is really important, brothers and sisters, do this. In view of God's mercy, in view of who he is and what he's done, here's what I want you to do. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. The way that you live, let that be worship. Paul talks about dying to sin and living with Christ. Treat your life as if you died somewhere weeks, months, years ago when Jesus found you, and you've been living worship ever since because we belong to him. Offer your lives holy and pleasing to God. It's the only reasonable response is to offer a living sacrifice. Every day I worship you. I worship you, God, in the way that I live. I worship you in a job that I love. I worship you in a job that I don't love. I worship you when I'm healthy. I worship you when I'm battling cancer. I worship you when I feel like I have plenty to share. I worship you when I feel like I'm in need. In the way that I live, everything that I do, may it be with your glory in mind, God. Because worship is so much more than a song I could sing, more than a music that could come out of my vocal cords. The songs come because of a worship that is born out of my heart in the way that I live every single day in response to your presence in my life. I'd like the worship team to come back up, and we're going to take a couple minutes. And I challenge you, go for it. And maybe what we did earlier, I could see some really real worship going on, okay? So this isn't an indictment on anybody, but maybe you came in this morning, it was just the thing to do to sing those songs, okay? These couple songs that we're going to do, sing those because Jesus has touched your life. And he's something worth celebrating. Could we all stand? Worship our God. He's our rock. He's our Redeemer. He's our righteousness. He's our hope. He's our deliverer. He's our defense. He's our shield. He's our salvation. He's our strength. He is the bread of life. He's the living water. He's the good shepherd. He's the true vine. He's the way. He is the truth. He is the life. Jesus is the light of the world that shone light on our darkness. He's the Lamb of God. My God is all powerful. He's ever present. He's all good through and through. He's the Alpha and the Omega. He's the beginning and the end for us. Jesus is the soon returning, coming, conquering King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It is to this God that we owe our lives as living sacrifices, holy, set apart, pleasing to God. So let's take that moment and just set our eyes on him and set a tone that we can take with us throughout this week. Because he is great and he is awesome and he is powerful and he is mighty and he's worthy of all our praise.